Welcome. You've arrived at a moment of stillness. A place of quiet. A space where your heart can rest. Maybe today has been loud. Maybe the past week has felt uncertain, stretched thin, or heavy in places you didn't expect. But here, for these next few moments, you don't need to do anything, prove anything, or carry anything. Just breathe. Tonight's story is about a man named Moses. A man who had once been a prince, but now lived as a shepherd in the wilderness. A man who had tried and failed. A man who had lost his sense of identity, purpose, and direction. Until one day, God called his name. And everything changed. But not with thunder. Not with fire from the sky. Not with applause or great signs. God met him in a quiet moment. In the form of a flame. In a bush. That did not burn away. This is a story about calling. About second chances. And about the truth that sometimes the most sacred moments happen in the most ordinary places. So settle in. Close your eyes, if you wish. And come with me to the edge of the desert, where a man who thought he was forgotten would discover that he had been chosen. Moses was tending sheep. That's how his days began. And how they ended. The rhythm of feeding, leading, and watching. He had once lived in Pharaoh's palace. He had once worn robes of fine linen, eaten with royalty, and learned the ways of kings. But that was long ago. That life had ended when he had acted on his anger. When he had seen an Egyptian strike a Hebrew slave, and had killed the man. He had buried the body in the sand. And when the truth came to light, he had run. Far from Egypt. Far from the palace. Far from his people. He had found a quiet life in Midian. He had married. He had become a shepherd. But something inside him had never quite settled. He still remembered the cries of his people. He still remembered the injustice. And he still wondered why his life had taken this path. He had grown older. Not old in years, but old in weariness. Old in questions. And yet, God had not forgotten him. One day, as Moses was guiding his sheep through the far side of the wilderness, he came to a mountain, Horeb, the mountain of God. There, something caught his eye. A bush. But not just a bush. It was burning. And yet, it was not consumed. The fire glowed. But the branches remained. The leaves held their shape. The flame did not eat. Only shimmered. Moses stopped. I will go over and see this strange sight, he said to himself. Why the bush does not burn up. And as he drew near, a voice called to him from within the fire. Moses? Moses? He froze. Here I am, he answered. And the voice said, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals. For the place where you are standing is holy ground. And Moses obeyed. He untied the worn straps, removed the sandals that had carried him through sand and silence, and stood barefoot on the earth. It was the same ground he had walked before, the same dust, the same rocks and shadows. But now it was holy, because God was here. The voice continued, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face. He was afraid to look at God, afraid of what might be seen in him, afraid of what he might feel rise within him, in the presence of something so sacred, so real. He had heard stories of this God from his mother, Jochebed, when he was still a child in her arms. He had heard about Abraham's stars, about Isaac's laughter, about Jacob's wrestling. But he had never heard God speak. Until now. And then came the words that would change everything. The voice said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. And I am concerned about their suffering." Moses stood silent, his breath caught between grief and awe. The voice went on, "So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." And then came the words that struck him to the core. "So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses staggered backward in spirit. He had spent years letting go of the identity he once held. He had been forgotten by Egypt, buried under time and silence. And now, he was being asked to return to the place of his failure, to the place of his past. "Who am I?" he asked, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He didn't ask out of pride. He asked from the hollow place where insecurity and shame had settled. But the voice did not respond with rebuke. Instead, it offered a promise. "I will be with you." No thunder. No long explanations. Just presence. "I will be with you." Still, Moses questioned. "If I go to the Israelites," he said, "and say, 'The God of your fathers has sent me,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' then what shall I tell them?" And God said, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say. I am has sent me to you." It was not just a name. It was a declaration. The voice from the fire was not a God made by hands, not a statue on a shelf, not one of Egypt's many idols. This was the eternal one, the unshaped, unchanging, ever-present God, the one who was and is and always will be. And God said more. He told Moses exactly what would happen. He described the journey ahead, the resistance, the signs that would come. "You will lead them out," he said. "You will worship on this mountain." And Moses still hesitated. "Suppose they don't believe me or listen to me," he whispered. "What if they say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" God asked him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," Moses replied. And God said, "Throw it on the ground." So he did, and it became a snake. Moses recoiled, afraid. "Reach out your hand," God said, "and take it by the tail." He did, and it became a staff again. Then God said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." He obeyed, and when he pulled it out, his hand was leprous, white as snow. "Put it back," God said. And when he did, it was restored. These were signs, reminders, that God would go with him, that this calling was not dependent on Moses' strength, but on God's power. Still, Moses trembled. "O Lord, I have never been eloquent," he said quietly. "I am slow of speech and tongue." And God replied, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and teach you what to say." But Moses pleaded, "O Lord, please send someone else." The fire did not fade. The voice did not withdraw. God, in his mercy, said, "Your brother Aaron is on his way. He will speak for you, but I will be with both of you." The calling remained, and so did the promise. God would not remove the mission, but he would not send Moses alone. Moses bent low. The bush still burned. The fire still glowed. And the voice of God had now become the voice of his future. The fire had spoken. The silence had broken. And Moses knew what he had to do. He returned home. The sheep were still grazing. The rhythm of the day had not changed. But inside him, everything was different. He went to his father-in-law, Jethro, and said, "Let me return to my own people in Egypt, to see if any of them are still alive." Jethro, a wise and peaceful man, simply said, "Go. I wish you well." There were no long arguments. No warnings. Just a quiet blessing. To go where the voice had called. God spoke again. He told Moses, "Go back to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you are dead." And so Moses set out. He took his wife and sons. He loaded a donkey. And he carried the staff that had once led sheep through the desert. Now it would lead people through history. As Moses walked, his heart carried questions. Would the people believe him? Would Pharaoh listen? Would he fail again? But he remembered what the voice had said. "I will be with you." And so he kept walking. Meanwhile, Aaron, Moses' brother, was already on his way. God had spoken to him too. He was coming to meet Moses in the desert. And when the two brothers saw each other, they embraced. Years had passed. So much had changed. But in that moment, they stood not just as family, but as partners in a mission far bigger than themselves. Moses shared everything. He told Aaron about the bush that burned, but did not burn up. About the voice that spoke his name. About the signs. The command. Aaron listened. And then together, they turned toward Egypt. As they neared the land of Pharaoh, Moses and Aaron gathered the elders of the Israelites. Aaron spoke the words God had given. Moses performed the signs. The staff turning into a serpent. The leprous hand. The wonders of power. And the people believed. They bowed down in awe. They worshipped. For they understood. God had seen them. God had remembered. And now, God had come near. But not everyone would welcome the message. Pharaoh still sat on the throne of Egypt, confident in his power, secure in his might, surrounded by gold, advisors, and gods of his own making. Moses and Aaron went to him. They stood before the man who ruled the known world, and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh raised an eyebrow. Perhaps he laughed. He said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." And just like that, resistance began. Pharaoh didn't just refuse. He increased the people's suffering. He ordered that they make bricks, without being given straw. He demanded more work, more labor, with few resources. The people cried out, and they turned on Moses and Aaron. "You have made us a stench to Pharaoh," they said. "You have brought trouble, not freedom." And Moses was shaken. He turned to God and asked, "Why, Lord? Why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued them at all." But God answered, not with rebuke, but with reassurance. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, I have heard the groaning of my people, and I have remembered my covenant. I will bring them out. I will free them. I will take them as my own people, and I will be their God. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was no longer unclear. Moses had returned, not as the man he once was, but as the man God had prepared him to become. He was no longer just a shepherd. He was a voice, a vessel, a bridge between bondage and freedom. And he would walk forward, with fear in his heart, yes, but with God beside him. Pharaoh had refused. The bricks had grown heavier. The people were bitter. And Moses, once full of trembling purpose, now felt the edges of doubt begin to creep in. He had obeyed. He had spoken. He had followed the fire. But nothing had changed. At least, not yet. Still, God's voice came. Not in anger, but in gentle repetition. A reminder. I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I established my covenant with them. I have heard the groaning of my people, and I will bring them out. I will redeem them with an outstretched arm, and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own, and I will be your God. The words echoed deep into Moses' heart. They were not empty. They were a promise. So Moses and Aaron returned to Pharaoh again. And again. And again. Each time, the message was the same. Let my people go. And each time, Pharaoh's heart was hard. But God had already said it would be so. He was not surprised. He was not delayed. This was the beginning of something greater. Then the signs began. Moses threw his staff before Pharaoh, and it became a serpent. Pharaoh's magicians did the same, but Moses' staff swallowed theirs. Still, Pharaoh would not listen. Then came the first plague. The Nile turned to blood. The waters ran red. The fish died. The land smelled of death. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. Then frogs poured across the land. They entered homes and ovens, beds and baskets. The croaking was relentless. Pharaoh begged Moses, "Pray to your God to take them away." Moses prayed. The frogs died. But once the pressure lifted, Pharaoh hardened again. Then gnats. Dust turned to insects, crawling across skin, into eyes and ears. Pharaoh's magicians tried to mimic it, but they failed. "This is the finger of God," they said. But Pharaoh would not listen. Then flies, swarming, biting, everywhere, except in Goshen, where God's people lived. There, the air remained clean. Pharaoh saw it, felt it. Still, he did not bend. One by one, the signs grew stronger. Livestock died. Boils spread. Hail fell from the sky. Locusts devoured the land. And still, Pharaoh resisted. Each time, he would waver, then harden again. And each time, Moses returned. He prayed. He spoke. He did not give up. And in the middle of it all, he remembered the bush. He remembered the fire, the voice, the promise. And perhaps he whispered to himself, "God is with me." Because that's all he needed. Not success. Not applause. Not ease. Just presence. In the quiet spaces between the plagues, Moses would speak to the people. He would tell them what God had said. He would remind them that their freedom was coming. Some believed. Some doubted. But all of them waited. And as they waited, The meaning of God's name, I Am, began to unfold. He was not just the God of their ancestors. He was the God of their now. He was in the waiting, in the darkness, in the cracks between signs. He was in the quiet resolve of a man who had once run from Egypt, but now stood in the middle of it, undaunted. Then came the warning. One final plague, the one that would break Pharaoh's will. Moses told Pharaoh what was coming, but still, Pharaoh did not listen. And so Moses prepared the people. He told them what God had instructed. A lamb for each household. Its blood brushed across the doorway. A meal shared in haste. Bitter herbs, flat bread. A night of watching. A night of trusting. The beginning of their deliverance. As the final night approached, Moses looked out over the people. He saw fear. He saw questions. But he also saw readiness. The fire had done its work in him. Now it was doing its work in them. Night fell over Egypt. A silence deeper than usual hung in the air. The moonlight touched the rooftops. But inside each home, the lamps were burning. In every Israelite dwelling, a lamb had been sacrificed. Its blood painted across the doorposts. A sign. A covering. Inside, families gathered around tables. They ate the meal that Moses had told them to prepare. Roasted lamb. Bitter herbs. Unleavened bread. There was no time to wait for bread to rise. No time to settle in or relax. They were dressed to leave. Their cloaks tucked in. Their sandals on. Staffs in hand. They were waiting. But not as slaves. They were waiting as people who had already been told. Tonight, the Lord will pass through the land. And when he sees the blood on your door, he will pass over you. No plague will touch you. And then it happened. Just before dawn, a great cry rose throughout Egypt. From the highest palace to the lowliest hut, every Egyptian household had been touched by death. The firstborn had fallen. Every heart trembled. Pharaoh rose in grief and fury. And he summoned Moses and Aaron. "Go," he said. "Leave my people. Take your flocks and herds. And go. And bless me also." It was over. The chains were broken. The door was open. The Israelites moved quickly. More than 600,000 men, along with women and children, set out from the land of their slavery. They carried dough on their shoulders. They wore gold and silver given by their neighbors. They carried stories of plagues, of promises, of the God who had remembered them. And Moses? He walked at the front. He who had once doubted, once begged to be left out, now led a nation into freedom. They journeyed into the wilderness. And by day, the Lord went ahead of them, in a pillar of cloud, and by night, a pillar of fire. He was with them, always. Moses never forgot the bush that had burned. He carried the memory with every step, because the fire had not stayed on the mountain. It had moved inside of him. It had become the force that guided his words, his steps, his courage. Later, when Moses stood at the edge of the sea, and the Egyptians came after them again, it was that fire that steadied him. He raised his staff. The waters parted, and the people crossed on dry ground. And still, God was with them. Moses would go on to climb mountains, to speak face to face with God, to lead through desert trials and storms of complaint, to intercede when the people failed, to receive the law. But everything began with a moment of stillness, a quiet flame, a voice that called his name. from a bush that burned, but was not consumed. And now, you've heard the story. Let it breathe in your heart. Let it settle gently around you. Maybe you, like Moses, have spent time in the wilderness. A place of delay. A place where old dreams fade, and newer, smaller routines begin to take over. Maybe you felt like your story stalled years ago. Like your purpose is behind you. Or perhaps there's something stirring in your soul. A sense that there must be more. That something's missing. That you were made for something you can't quite name. If so, Moses knows that feeling. And so does God. You see, God didn't call Moses when he was strongest, or most confident, or in his prime. He called him when he felt the furthest away, when Moses no longer saw himself as a leader, or a voice, or anything important. But God saw him, and still called him by name. And God sees you too. Sometimes the bush is burning, right where you are, in the middle of your job, your home, your exhaustion, your doubts. And the voice that speaks from that quiet fire still says, I see you. I've heard your cry. I have a purpose for you. Take off your shoes. This place, this moment, is holy. You may not feel ready. Moses didn't either. You may have reasons why you're not enough. So did he. But the answer God gives has never changed. I will be with you. Not just when you feel brave, but when you feel broken. Not just when the seas part, but even in the silence. Before anything happens. And maybe you're not meant to lead a nation, but you might be called to speak peace into someone's storm, to bring kindness where it's been missing, to forgive where bitterness wants to grow, to raise children, to hold space for healing, to speak for someone who can't speak for themselves. The flame still burns, and the voice still calls. Tonight, as you rest, remember this. The ground you walk on, your life, your journey, your pain, your story, can be holy. God still speaks in the quiet, still meets us in ordinary places, still lights flames in forgotten corners of our lives. Yo.